And we seem to be live, everybody. So welcome everybody to the second half of our amazing series of AI in recruiting. I have to say, and I think, Sal, I hope you'd agree with me on this, but the series we did, like the 1 to 4, I thought we had, or that I've actually seen online when it comes to where AI sits in recruiting. I thought we had some exceptional conversations with some really great guests. And I'm really pleased to be able to say we are going to power through and give you the episodes 5 to 8. So we're going to continue and finish this conversation off.
I thought we were going more like the sort of Star Wars theme, where now these are the prequels and you're going to get to see what we thought before all of that good stuff happened. No, is that we're not going to go with that sort of approach?
No. I think the prequel is always a terrible mistake. In my view, nothing is true after Return of the Jedi. It's all didn't happen. So yes, we're going to continue going forward. Folks, I hope you're going to be with us for all of this. We're going to cover all of the aspects that AI is touching the world of recruitment. Plus, we're going to zoom out and talk about where AI sits in the world of work as well. So hopefully you'll be able to get both the macro and the micro in this series. But before we kick off, I just want to make sure that audio is okay. So folks, want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. If you can, please do let me know. You should have access to the chat feature here. Let me just make sure that everyone does have access to that. Oftentimes we don't. Maybe you don't actually. Oh yeah, I think people do. Let me know in the chat. Switch to everyone if you do. Okay, thank you, Helen. I really appreciate that. And we do have a Q&A function, which I do believe is in operation. So if you want to make use of any, if you have any questions that you definitely want to have answered that we haven't covered in our conversation, use the Q&A feature and we'll take it from there. Thank you, Michele. I appreciate it. Okay, let's kick off. Siadhal, I think most people know you very well. You've done an awesome job in getting your personal brand out there. But for the few who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you and what it is you do?
Sure. Hey, folks. I'm Siadhal. I'm one of the co-founders at Metaview. We think a ton about how AI can impact recruiting in the immediacy, but also, of course, in the long run as well. In terms of what Metaview actually does, so we're an AI note taker built specifically for recruiters. So we take a very tailored view to how we build this AI note taker. It basically means that if you use Metaview, when you have a conversation with a candidate, you don't have to worry about taking notes at all, because Metaview will put together perfectly structured, perfectly summarized notes exactly the way you like them. So you personally, the way you personally like your notes, Metaview does it for you. So all part of our broader vision to take away elements of toil from a recruiter's life so they can really focus on the higher leverage parts of recruiting. And yeah, otherwise really pumped to be having this conversation. Definitely my favorite thing on the planet to talk about, which is AI in recruitment. So yeah, excited for the chat.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And by the way, folks, Metaview have recently released, I believe it was last week, was it 33 languages supported now, so not just English. And I posted about it today. I think it's a real game changer in terms of anybody who is operating in an international space or has a multilingual recruitment team, or indeed interacts with candidates or hiring managers that don't use English as default first language. So this is like Babelfish type technology. If anybody's a Hitchhiker's sort of Guide to the Galaxy fan, I did mean it when I said it. This is the sort of technology that makes me miss being operating recruiter. So great to see. By the way, Sal, great to see the product sort of pace of new feature push out. I think it's really, really awesome. Okay, let's get on with it. We named this topic AI will save recruitment. Why did you in particular endorse this title for this series, Sal?
Really born out of the amount of almost, I would say, doomsday scenario or doom mongering that sort of is happening around AI and recruitment. Don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of positivity. I think there's a lot of experimentation as well, but there is also this sort of like under this hum of doomsday scenario. And I think especially in a world where sort of the technical innovation is so quick, it can start to be quite anxiety inducing. Like, hey, is fundamentally how we're working going to change in a way that disenfranchises me as a recruiter. And the reason I think that's really not the case is for a really simple reason, which is many jobs in the world, your sort of main output or your main, or maybe even your main input is sort of interacting with software, with technology. And that may be that there's going to be a whole lot of disruption there. But in recruiting and other parts of talent, your main interactions, almost your main product is another human being. So it's one of the most human-centric roles in all sort of white collar knowledge work. And so there's actually this incredible opportunity for folks in recruiting to see this as an opportunity as opposed to a threat. So I'm definitely an AI optimist. I do think there's going to be disruption along the way. I actually think the disruption to recruiting will be a really positive one, because it's really those human things that are going to be the last to go. And guess what? It's those human things that we've all been saying for the longest time are the parts of our role that we enjoy the most. So I think this is an accelerator towards sort of the type of recruiting folks have always said they wanted to do. And I really want to make sure that point gets hammered home. So yeah, I guess we'll chew the corners off that a little bit more during the course of today. But that's my big sort of message is recruiting is human-centered. And that's a really good thing in this world where a lot of non-human centric things are going to start to be automated away.
Yeah, it's a really so this is a counter narrative against the AI pessimism that we're seeing, which is anxiety inducing. Folks, let me know in the chat, how are you feeling anxious about AI? What do you feel about it when you're hearing things, maybe trying things? Do you feel a little bit that, okay, maybe I'm in trouble career-wise or whatnot? Let us know in the chat. It would be great to have you contribute to this conversation. In fact, if there's a way to put a poll up, I think that would be worth one to try. Do you feel positive about AI or negative about AI? That I think is a reasonable yes, no on that. That'd be very, very interesting to see. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about do you know, what's your theory as to why it is anxiety inducing? I think that we could probably achieve one part of consensus that it does have this emotional effect. The emotional journey of use of AI is initial skepticism, default like old age skepticism. Then you try it and then you kind of think, oh, didn't expect that. Then you try it again. Then you're a little bit shocked and you think, oh my goodness, this is amazing, magical experience. Haven't had this since I was a kid. Then you try it again, and then the fear starting to burble away, as you say, in an ambient way, because it's not like anybody's like lecturing you in this, but you ambiently feel it. Why do you think this exists, Siadhal? Didn't exist in the mobile came out, no one felt this, right? Internet came out, no one really felt that. So why is AI as a class of technology providing this sort of anxiety?
I do think there is a chunk of it which is like about the unknown. Like, I think because of these generative aspects, these generative products we're seeing on the market, where things are literally being created in ways, we might have intuition about how that came about, but we don't, most folks don't and shouldn't understand the underlying technology. There's no point in understanding the underlying technology. So there is this sort of just general fear of the unknown. But I think the other sort of, I guess the most important thing is, obviously, I mentioned previously that folks in recruitment, and I count myself in that. I've been working in recruitment now for 5 years, working very close with talent leaders, recruiters, there's a whole bunch of tasks that we've built up in our minds as being part of the recruitment job. And we may have been complaining about some of those tasks, but we still saw them as, hey, that's part of what I do. And we're obviously learning that there's a bunch of those tasks that will be, frankly, automated away. And the way I like to think about it is, if there's any part of your job that historically you've thought, you know what, I could do this on autopilot, then guess what? An autopilot is going to start to do that thing. So, that is going to go away. And so for sure, there's going to be disruption of some of these tasks, and, some of the hours of your day, well, there's things you used to spend hours on, you'll now spend minutes on. And so of course, there's a question of, well, what am I going to do with that time? And the jump that one needs to make to understand, oh yeah, I have been saying that I'd love to do all of these things, isn't always made by folks. It's more the focus on the fear about the thing that's going away and what that might mean for me, as opposed to the time that frees up to be more of a sort of a consigliere with my HM, like I've always wanted to be. I've always wanted to understand the business better so I could advise the HM better on what they should be looking for on the market. or I've always wanted to spend more time with candidates to really get to know them and understand their motivations and their fears and uncertainties about this role, but I had to shuffle them through the process instead, and so I never got to do that. There are some really fundamental things that, again, are not going to be impacted by AI, which is where the opportunity is. But again, to come back to your question, why is there this anxiety? Because there will be some things that recruiters see as part, at least, of their role that will go away, and people don't always make the jump to understand this means these other things I can do better at.
Yeah. So number one is the fear of the unknown, and perhaps AI is more complicated than the previous iterations of technology that we've seen. Mobile is pretty obvious. It's just, we're now carrying computers around. AI, well, what is AI exactly? Suddenly it's spitting out these things. How does it do that? Like, we're not sure. So maybe one of the ways in which we could ameliorate the sense of anxiety is obviously to get educated a little bit more about how it actually creates these things. So perhaps that's something that we could do. If you do feel anxiety about this, go and educate yourself as to how these technologies work. And you can actually ask AI to explain it for you as if you're 5, and it does a reasonable job of that. So that is one way to think about it. The second point you mentioned, I think, is very interesting. There is a fundamental truth that there are components of the recruiter's job that are going to be automated away. So individually, we're going to expect our jobs to change. I think it's fair to say a recruiter today is going to be a recruiter 5 years from now will be doing very different distribution of tasks in terms of time distribution compared to the tasks that they're doing today. Can you kind of outline the sort of things that you, let's get specific. What are the things that you do see being disappeared? You're already building something that's going to do that. I think note-taking is a clear example of, okay, that's going to go. What other things do you think will start, either reducing to nothing or being kind of done by a machine and not a human being?
Yeah, I'm actually going to share screen for this because I think the visual aid might help with this.
Oh yeah, perfect. I saw this slide. It's excellent.
Yeah, so I think this is like a really great start, but this is obviously not exhaustive. I think one really important principle also to take away from this conversation, or just generally as you think about, hey, how am I gonna react to this AI revolution, is the immediate term consequences are going to be like putting a turbocharger on your back. So it's like you're still going to do a lot of the same things because the infrastructure we have is set up in a certain way. So this is a reflection of that. This is like things you're currently doing that you'll be able to do sort of in a different way or better. But then over time, of course, there might be more foundational changes where we realize, hey, we're gonna operate in a totally different way. So this is not covering that second bucket. This is much more, what are you doing now and what can you do instead? So I mentioned previously that if you find yourself doing something on autopilot, there's going to be an autopilot that starts to do it. So you can think of things that I would say that most time people can do somewhat on autopilot are on the left-hand side. These are things that tend to be like, they're toil, they're a bit drudgerous. Sometimes they're a bit of a comfort zone for us as well, which of course, we're all human. So sometimes we want to spend time there, but the reality is they're not differentiated. And then the right-hand side are the things that actually are truly differentiated and very human, and like no one is working on an AI to do for us for the foreseeable future. So you used to spend a lot of time, or people still do, obviously, really scouring the internet for profiles and finding people that I can add to the pipeline, show to the HM, whatever it might be. We're going to spend less time doing that. We're going to spend more time actually understanding the hiring manager's needs, and probably more importantly than that, helping the hiring manager understand their needs, right? You as a recruiter are going to have an understanding of the market. You're going to have, frankly, spoken to more candidates than this person, most likely. You may even have experience at other companies, sort of seeing what great look like there, actually helping them and being that advisor, getting to the point where they understand the type of profile they need, rather than this sort of scattergun approach is one thing. Less time reviewing irrelevant applications. So like, clicking through the applications that have come through to your ATS or however you do that, and sort of, maybe taking, there's different stats. People say people spend like 10 to 30 seconds reviewing an application before they're making a decision. Like, that is not a good use of your time. But actually meeting with relevant candidates is, because again, you can put a face to the company. You can influence their perception, their sort of first impression about the company really deeply, which is vital. Less time scheduling candidates and interviewers, which again, feels like that should have been automated away a long time ago, but still talk to people that they spend a bunch of time doing that. and more time again doing something that is way too nuanced and relies on way too much institutional knowledge, preparing candidates, preparing interviewers for this particular interview, not in a way that's completely cookie cutter, but actually understands the context of the interviewers and the candidates who are involved to make sure that they're all prepared appropriately. Less time spent on generating these superficial connections with candidates, more time on deep connections with few candidates. Obviously, now getting into our world, Metaview's world, less time and energy spent transcribing and then writing up what someone said, and much more time actually engaging with what people are saying, reacting to it, parsing it, understanding it. Less time corralling and nagging interviewers, which is a super frustrating thing to do. No better way to reduce your like corporate or social credibility or collateral by being that person who has to chase people up for things. Much more time advising interviewers and HMs and really getting to that place where, again, everyone has said they've wanted to be, which is, how can I be that advisor to the hiring team? Well, you're going to struggle to do that if you're sort of bucketed as the person who herds the cats through an interview process, and that's gonna go away too. So this is my view of these sort of concrete examples. And again, I think there's two ways to think about this. One is maybe from me from a technology perspective, like what are the ways that we can use technology to make this transition occur? The other way to think about it, potentially more relevant to this audience, is if you're thinking about sort of building your career and obviously accelerating and nailing things over the next few years, you really want to be thinking, I don't care so much about being excellent at the things on the left. I do care a bit about being excellent at the things on the right. Really simple way to think about it.
Take a screenshot of this, folks. I saw this slide, I think a week or so ago. I can't remember when I came across it, but I really liked the way in which you've did that comparison left to right. And they're identifiable, they are identifiable. We've just had a quick poll and it's a unanimous decision. Everyone's positive.
Well, there we go.
We can close the show. The series is over. Everyone loves AI. Your fears are not founded, Sal. No, but I think that it's great that people can see the positive on it. There was actually some really interesting commentary on the chat. Thank you, Leo, for his observation that actually the cultural production of movies in Hollywood and what have you, it has a significant impact. AI, immediately we think of Terminator, immediately we think of, HAL 2000 and what have you. Every single sort of concept of an artificial intelligence is almost always hostile to humanity. And that's very, very clear. It's only one way. And what's also very interesting is that there is cultural differences about the acceptance of AI and the value of it. For instance, very interestingly, in Asia, in China, for instance, AI is widely considered to be, of course, you should deploy this. There's no question. Whereas here in Europe, Western world, whatnot, pretty much reticent. So the cultural production aspect, I think, is not to be underestimated. Like, what are the stories we're telling ourselves?
I think that's totally valid. I think it's a really excellent point. But then there's like levels to the debate, isn't there? There's like, hey, as a planet, as a people, as a species, what's AI going to do for us? And I would say the sort of the amount of influence that the human beings, the individuals in this call are going to have on that is like relatively small. And then there's another question, which is, given there's a degree of inevitability about AI, is this going to be a good thing for my day-to-day? Am I going to be a higher leverage, higher impact person in my profession? Or am I going to actually, is my level of impact going to decrease? And I guess that's where I spend more time, just because, well, we all on this call are in a pretty lucky position. We have a bit of agency there. We can actually affect in some ways how AI is going to impact our day-to-day. So yeah, I definitely really comfortable, like, love talking about that stuff. I do think there's obviously big questions about macro, like what does this do for society as a whole, that are really hard to predict, and almost certainly whatever you sort of pull out of me on this call will be wrong, and whatever you say will probably be wrong as well. Whereas I think the sort of the tactical stuff is a bit more predictable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those things probably mix, don't they? Like we don't, in our own minds, our own consciousness, we're not like literally crystallizing these things as separate. We just ambiently feel, oh, what's going on? I think, yes, we're absorbing all of this cultural stuff. Everyone knows Terminator. So we probably have approached AI with a defensive posture even before it arrived. And then there is the mystery. We've talked about that. our lack of, there's a gap in our knowledge. So again, we fill that with fear, we fill that with whatever we have. And then thirdly, there are active things that are going to change. And maybe there's a fear of change as well. Be interesting to know where we're at generationally on this. We talk about regional divergence. What do younger people coming into the workforce think about AI? Is that different compared to other people? I'm old enough to remember when there was like widespread hostility to the internet arriving for the first time, because that was perceived to be, I know I've had a lot of work done, mate. But the sort of those people hostile to it. They were rejected the idea of email. It's all recruiters are actually, one of those jobs that were quite hostile to technological innovation at the time. But of course, without the internet, we wouldn't have the diversification of the recruiter jobs that we've seen. Sourcing wouldn't be happening. Recruitment marketing wouldn't be happening. Data analysts wouldn't be happening. None of that would be happening. So maybe we see a similar type of kind of a diversification of recruiter roles with the advent of AI, which you kind of pointed to with the right-hand side of the screenshot.
This is going to look like we planned this, but I promise everyone we didn't, because we sort of set the topic and then got together 5 minutes before, just because Hung and I have had a couple of chats on like this topic broadly, but never gone this deep. Funny enough, that diversification was lit. I actually have a slide to talk about that as well, so I'm gonna go for it. So basically, but I think this is just the way I think about. Like I actually personally sometimes struggle to put to words until I can visualize it in my mind, and so this is like a process I went through of trying to sort of help myself, but also maybe others understand how I see things going, which is, if you think about the way that time is spent now, there's actually a bunch of time that a recruiter, so vertical axis is time spent, so how much of your day is spent on certain things, and then the horizontal axis is how much time is spent on planning, how much time is spent on these things that you can do on autopilot that are grind, I called it drudgery here, and how much of your time is spent performing. So really in life, as a company, let's talk it from business sense. In business, you want to spend as much of your time on either planning or performing. And like the work about work in between is just like a nuisance. Unfortunately, we have to do it, but I either want to be planning and coming up with an amazing plan, or I want to be performing that plan and nothing else in between. Right now, there are, recruiting teams in general spend a lot of time on this toil, a lot of the stuff I had on the left-hand side here. Whereas in future, you will see this, what you described as, I think you're going to see more of that specialization, where actually you spend less time on, of course, these drudgerous tasks, and therefore you'll spend more time on planning and more time on performing. But of course, it probably doesn't make sense for this to be one person anymore, right? It makes sense for some group of people to be really excellent at the planning side of things, and some other group of people to be really excellent at the performing side of things, which in our world means, again, talking to candidates, influencing hiring managers. Really, those two stakeholders are like the crux of it. So totally agree with that specialization. I think specialization is usually a byproduct of technological advancement. You get sort of essentially people who are more self-sufficient in less developed economies, for example. So usually what you get is more specialization as things essentially improve, for want of a better word. So I think that will happen as a result of this as well.
I wonder, folks, this is a quick one to the audience, but has anybody written anything about just speculating what these future AI enabled recruiter jobs might look like? I'm thinking of, has someone like, Kevin Wheeler or Peter Hinson or anybody like that speculated on this? Josh Burson? If they have, let me know. If not, also let me know, because I think that'll be just useful to chew over what that looks like. Like, just imagine us pre-internet, and we were thinking, okay, there's going to be a sourcer person, or there's going to be a recruitment marketing person. That would be crazy talk to a lot of those phone recruiters at the time. But of course, these have become like full-on disciplines now, multi-million-dollar businesses, in fact, as subgenres. So very interesting to see what those. Don't talk to me about recruiter enablement. Adam Gon's getting enough free press out of me, so no more on that. But yes, quite right. Okay, let's talk about some of the I guess the critical arguments of AI, and let's just play around with these, because we've talked about, okay, listen, AI, 100% of people voting here say AI is positive, but we also have to say there's a reason why there is concern. Number one, the most sort of primary one that I've uncovered that people are very animated about is this fear that AI will be biased, and in fact, we've already seen canonical examples of where people have implemented some sort of artificial intelligence and they've produced outputs, which I think all of us might be pretty uncomfortable with. Pretty famously, Amazon had an early AI trained on historical sort of CV data as to who they hired and who performed well, and then it ended up just like default rejecting all the women that were in the thing. So it was like, okay, I don't think anybody's happy with that. So what's the arguments against? Not you per se, Siadhal, but can you give us some idea of how do we handle the objection of AI being biased?
Yeah, and so I think that's totally warranted. I think maybe, as with many sort of discussions, maybe sometimes what you see sort of in the public is more binary. It's like it's either amazing or it's terrible. Of course, the reality is somewhere in between. So in the case of bias, I think that's a great it's a great negative example of what something to be wary of, right? And a great example of why, actually, again, as whether it's recruiters or whether it's other operators within businesses, you're going to keep that human in the loop for that judgment. So I think there's two really important things to consider. One is that much as that, let's take that Amazon example, much as sort of there was this negative outcome as a result of this AI, there was still someone in that organization, a human being, who was held accountable for that going wrong. Now, I'm not saying they definitely got sort of, a bad thing happened to them because they messed up, but clearly there was like a lesson learned out of this and they improved things over time. The point being isn't that, hey, we can improve these things, don't worry. My point is there's still human beings that are going to be accountable for these things. So you better make sure that you are still owning the outcome. And so usually when I see folks who are actually most confident in adopting AI, sometimes it's related to their technical sort of aptitude, or like they're just general early adopters. But most of the time it's related to a really high confidence in understanding the outcomes that they own. So in recruiters' case, that's obviously things like time to hire, candidate experience, offer acceptance rates. Those things aren't changing. Those are still exactly what you're responsible for. So when you have like a high level of confidence in those, that you own those outcomes, I think it also creates confidence to try out solutions, whether they're AI or otherwise, to see if they help you achieve that thing, but knowing that you are still the one who's accountable for it. So in the case of that Amazon example, someone was accountable for creating a diverse, high-performing workforce. This AI tool did not help them achieve that. And so, bad outcome for them.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, and Ollie, thanks for the comment. I believe Amazon did just abandon it, and it was actually uncovered. So they saw it, abandoned it. It wasn't a big deal, and then people dug up the story, and then they had to do a big PR campaign afterwards. So I think they did an internal stop on it. And
just to finish that sort of thought of. If you think about what Amazon was doing there, they were essentially using AI for decisions. They were saying, "Hey, AI, filter this for me because I don't want to look at all of this stuff." Now, of course, we currently rely a lot on human beings to filter things and can also be prone to bias. So I think there's a secondary debate, which is, well, how easy will it be to get an AI that's actually, it may be somewhat biased, but less biased than the human beings who are currently doing the job, like very similar to the self-driving debate. Sure, there's going to be crashes with self-driving cars occasionally, but if there's a tenth as many crashes as with human drivers, isn't that better? Is like a debate. But the other sort of way to think about this is there's so many other things you can rely on AI for that aren't like really core business decisions. So automating away things that I sort of, just to beat that drum again, automating away things that aren't really part of your decision-making process so that you can spend more time as the human making the decision does not have the same risk from a bias perspective. It actually does the opposite. It frees you up to have potentially more information at your fingertips and also more time so that you don't have to take the shortcut. Like, what is bias? Bias is a mental shortcut. You take mental shortcuts if you assume good intentions, you take mental shortcuts when you are time pressured, you need to make a decision quickly. You have lack of information at your fingertips. What are you going to do? As any frankly, animal they would take a mental shortcut in order to get to an outcome that they needed. And I think there'll be fewer of those mental shortcuts that is empowered by AI. So I think there is definitely a positive slant. I think it's the decisions where, yes, you need to be watching that basket of eggs a lot more closely when you want to start to rely on AI to make your decisions, which is something that I personally don't think we're ready. Like, I don't think the technology is there yet. And I think when it does come to the fore, I think it will be much more along the lines of recommendations, or did you know this thing that you may have missed, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. And actually, it's a very, very useful tool for us to kind of think about this challenge. Because if you're watching this and you're a recruiter, inevitably your business is going to ask you about these issues. You know, how are you going to deal with bias, Mr. Recruiter or Mrs. Recruiter? You're going to have a response. One of the things you said there, Sal, very interesting, is like, where do you locate the AI? Where do you deploy it within the framework of the process? And essentially, the rule of thumb might be, you want to get it away from the decision-making process. You want to get it deployed where it's just operational processing, just get it doing the processing. But when it's making a decision on outcomes, that's where the human being needs to come in. And maybe that in itself can be a moderator as to when a human being needs to step in. Like, how important is the decision? So there's two ways to think about it. Number one, where's the decision? Where there are decisions to be made, how important is that decision? And the greater the importance of the decision, the less AI, the more human needs to be. So there's kind of a way in which we might be able to think about eliminating the bias argument by thinking about where we deploy human versus AI. Does that make sense, everybody? I'm not sure whether I've explained that in a reasonable way, but I think that is probably pouring our way towards a future which is palatable, but also practical. Because I think that the as you say, the Amazon example, they just outsourced the decision making to the machine, and it produced outcomes which ultimately were not what they were looking for. Okay, let's look at another bias, another critique of AI. This one really coming from from the right wing side of the political spectrum, which is to say, oh, that's all well and good. We're going to get rid of bias, but we're just going to inject some other bias that I don't agree with in there. And we're talking about things like progressive politics. We're talking about, you know, diversity and inclusion and stuff like this. I get the sense that there is certainly on the US sort of commentary, a kind of a discernible backlash against diversity and inclusion, given US cultural power. Inevitably, that's going to cascade across into other areas of the world. So what's the argument against that idea? Hey, I think AI is too woke. Elon Musk, classically, he was a truth GPT. He's hinting very heavily that the current GPTs out there are trained by culturally left-wing people, therefore are infused with the sort of the bias that is pretend to be anti-bias, but it's his own kind of bias. And I'm going to respond with my own bias. So how do we handle all this stuff, Sile?
I don't want to be, I hope this won't be boring, but I think it's the same answer, which is we all have to get comfortable enough to the point where we understand that we, as the humans in the loop of these companies, are responsible for the outcome. So when you think about, and that's going to sort of manifest itself in two ways. One is what parts of my job or my company, the work that my company does, do we decide to use more AI for? And what parts do we think the human being provides alpha? So for example, I might think that scheduling is something that I'm perfectly happy for AI to do for me, and I'm just never going to think about it again. And someone else might think, well, you know what? I actually want to be really close to who we schedule at what time, because I know that when we find a great candidate, I want to get them in tomorrow. And over time, I'm going to make those changes myself. And eventually the AI will learn from me and then realize when I want people to be scheduled more quickly because of a certain thing that they say in their interview or something like that. So I basically think that these AIs will become increasingly personal. I can't really talk to, I guess, the sort of the answers that things like ChatGPT spit out and what's censored and what's not, because the way that we operate is very much based on data that exists in the company we work with, systems. But I think the overall answer will be it'll become much more personal to us. It will learn from how you interact with it to the point where essentially those models are almost fine-tuned to you as an individual. Now, I don't know if whether that's good for people's media diet or not, and the type of answers they get about political issues. Way beyond I'm happy to jam on it, but obviously not an area of like that I spend a bunch of time on. But from working in enterprise perspective, I think these AIs will essentially become more personal. They'll be your personal co-pilot for what you're trying to do, and they will understand how you go about doing the work that you do.
That's a really interesting vision. And folks, do you agree with that concept? So right now, what we're seeing with AI interactions with it is it's a generic tool. We're all entering into ChatGPT, we're entering into Google Bard, we're entering into Claude, whatever it is, or even when Copilot rolls out to everyone on desktop, it's still going to be a generic thing, and we can't really tell too much about it. Maybe this is where we get uncomfortable about, I don't like who's trained this, it's probably biased left or right, it's biased against this, that, the other. You know, I think you can make a legitimate argument against this. But the step beyond is going to be a kind of an AI which is your best mate, essentially. A little sort of machine, there's a sort of ghost in the machine that's going to be trained on your behavior so that it'll simply accelerate your activity and productivity, and in fact be able to point out your pitfalls. Like, for instance, it might be able to start correcting you to say, oh, Hong, do you realize, you know, whenever you get an email from, you know, this type of domain, you're spending way too much time responding. Do you really enjoy chatting with these people? It's not very efficient. Stuff like that, right? So it will be very personal. And I think that will help eliminate the bias argument, because you literally say, hey, it's reflecting back on you. It's like you're bringing this to the thing. So,
yeah.
So folks,
I think the answer I provided was not a full answer. And I say that sort of like, not like, hey, I'm going to try again and give a full answer this time. I just think it's really hard to give a full answer. I think that the situation you described, where certain tools or platforms, certain AI platforms, give different responses based on how they've essentially been trained, and maybe in some cases like deterministically programmed, that will be a thing, and people will have to decide based on A, which tools do they adopt, B, how do they configure them, and I'm sure in some cases organizations will want some centralized control over, you know, over some of that configuration, and that sort of sophistication will probably happen over time. But that again, for me, that sort of speaks to a good thing, almost the sort of the underlying positive to take out of this, which is, I just named a bunch of decisions that are going to be made by humans. It's not like, hey, we bring in this AI and then suddenly this, whatever biases this AI has just runs riot, and we're just we're the ones who typing what it tells us to type and hiring who it tells us to hire. And that's not what's happening. You're going to have a lot of agency in deciding which tools you use and how you use them.
I can imagine the company policy. I can imagine a head of TA in future kind of configuring the areas in which AI might be deployable within the recruitment process. In fact, that's probably going to be one of the functions that recruiters will have to perform. So there might be a classic, recruiting funnel, for instance. Let's just visualize this. And perhaps the recruiter will be able to say, you know what, we're going to be able to use AI in this part of the process to this level because we feel that's positive and that's good. This area, we want it entirely human. This area, actually entirely AI. This area, we're going to do AI for 40% of it. And then human comes in at these events. And then that configuration will be unique to every company, I assume, based on your tolerance to, the intrusion of AI, if I can use that term, or whether a human being, you want a human being to own everything, whatever it might be. So we're going to find different experiences as we configure this according to our own circumstances, our own needs, maybe even per job, maybe even per job family, for instance. It could well be.
For sure. And so what you just described is like a top-down configuration, which is like, literally there'll be some frankly user interface that people will use to administer that and configure that. But I think maybe the more exciting area is the bottoms up almost ambient configuration. So if you think about when you hire someone very junior or sort of early stage in their career on your team, you onboard them obviously, and then you sort of ask them to do their first mini project that's going to result in them sending something to someone with high authority in the company. You as their manager are going to check what they did, and you're going to sort of pore over it, redline it, get them to change a bunch of things before they send it to the recipient. And then and you might spend an hour doing that, maybe more. Next time they do it, hey, it's a bit better. I'm only going to spend half an hour. And over time, this person gets so good at this thing that actually you as an operator, as a manager, will start to say, you know what, it's not, they get it perfectly right 95% of the time, 99% of the time. I'm just not even going to look at that anymore. We've all probably worked or have people in our team where we feel that's the case. We just essentially trust them that near enough it's going to be better than I would do, just as good, or somewhere close enough that it's not worth me looking at it. The same thing's going to be there with AI. So just as you get some people when they're managers, they're micromanagers, and they err more on the side of, hey, whatever this in this case human being outputs is a reflection of me, so I'm going to be all over it. Other managers are much less you know what, I can spend my time on other things because I trust this enough. You're going to see the same thing with AI. So the decisions that we'll make will determine how effective we are as operators. If you're someone who decides to have oversight over this thing, there'll be another recruiter out there who decides not to have oversight over that thing because they want to spend more time in this thing. And we'll all work out we'll all see over time which is the right approach. But the point is you'll still have that ability.
A diversity of AI configuration, folks. How's that for an inclusive way of working? But I think that's positive. I think the worst thing we can do is to have a universalized approach in any respect. I actually think, I think again, zooming out to the macro, a lot of the pessimists or the doomers, so to speak, are concerned, for instance, about different countries, different legislative environments, creating different AIs and all the rest of it. I personally think that's a positive thing, because I think when you're doing something new and experimenting in this way, it's better that we have different sort of mindsets and different approaches, because none of us know what's right. The worst thing we can do is for one party to universalize it and say, this is how it's done. What if it's not the right way? There may not be any way to back out of it. So it's almost like we're in a new environment. There's lots of different life forms evolving and competing to fill these ecological niches. Lots of them are going to succeed. Lots of them are going to fail. But there's going to be of different ways to succeed in different ways that they're going to fail. So that's just how life is going to work. Okay. I just had a vision on this. Do you ever think AIs will ever speak to AIs in the internal corporate context? So let's imagine there's a robo-Siadhal out there, and robo-Siadhal is cracking on doing whatever it is, predominantly speaking to you, because that's the thing. But what do you envisage a scenario where, maybe I want robo-Siadhal to speak to robo-Hung? Those two can talk and get some best practice of each other and do some recommends, or maybe there isn't even an AI swap over. I mean, how freaky would that be? Is this flight fancy?
I can imagine. I think right now a lot of one of the things that's like blowing all of our minds is that you can talk to AI in natural language and it talks back to you in natural language. So then the next step is, well, hang on, couldn't two AIs just speak to each other with natural language? And then it's like really auditable by me, by us, whoever. I can see literally what these two AIs talks about, which is sort of what you're describing. So I can imagine a moment in time in the future where that sort of thing does happen, whether it's like a personal representation of me or whether it's just like other like AI bots that sort of converse with each other. But I also think then you take sort of fast forward another 10 years, 20 years after that, we'll probably look back on that as totally archaic. Like, why were we getting these two algorithms to sort of spend time conversing with each other in this way, when actually we'll have a new way of knowing what the outcome of that interaction is going to be in half a second. So I can imagine a moment in time, it's sort of like a sort of anthropomorphization of AI that's going on at the moment, but I imagine that won't actually stand the test of time because it just doesn't feel that efficient, basically.
Let's have a look at the legislative environment, Siadhal. I don't know whether you've been keeping an eye on this in any way, but there's obviously laws being rolled out. Every sort of country is thinking about how to, I wouldn't say control AI, but at least put guardrails in. And obviously that's got cascade effects to product builders, and it's also got cascade effects to product users. So very interestingly, probably one of the areas that's leading on this is New York, the state of New York, where they've already, I think the law is actually in place now, whereby any organization that's using technology that has AI in it, it's again all very vague, but if you're using technology that has AI in it, you've got to declare it to the candidate. And you've got to make the decision-making process opaque for the candidate. And very interestingly, if you are found in non-compliance or whatever, it's not the product maker that's going to be sort of in the hock, but also the product implementer. So in other words, the company that's bought the product might potentially be at legal risk if they get this wrong. Isn't this going to just stop AI dead in the water? Like, if someone's going to say, no, we can't use it because it's like putting us at a huge risk. This is in New York, or say. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't see that as I mean, it depends what you're using AI for. Again, like if you're using an AI to make a decision for you that previously you trusted a human being with, then yeah, your duty of explainability there is like relatively just as high as it was before. You'd have to explain why a human made a decision. You should have to explain why an AI makes a decision too. But again, I would say most of the most impactful applications of AI that I've seen don't actually relate to that decision making. So when much as you still might want to declare that you're using a tool, which I think again will probably have a couple of years where everyone does that, then we realize that's pointless because everyone's using AI in everything. So it's just like, seeing pop-ups all the time saying AI is being used. Like, what's the point? But so whatever, we can stand that for now. But the actual sort of, I guess the real crux of what this legislation is trying to get at, which is essentially that you're not sort of passively letting AI make decisions for you and just sort of shrugging your shoulders about what the outcome is, I think is perfectly fine. One thing I would stress again is there's a lot of AI tools out there that are nothing to do with your decision. So I still think we'll garner a lot of the benefits of sort of the automation and detection of certain issues, automation of certain things and detection of certain issues that AI can suddenly do for us without even risking falling foul of that regulation. And then where the regulation really comes into effect is around decisions. And then it feels pretty reasonable to me for there to be like a lot of thought about how you adopt AI in those scenarios.
Let's have a look at AI in recruitment from the other side of the fence. The candidate usage of AI. And I when you flashed up that initial slide deck about some of the points on the left, which you thought were going to be reduced in terms of recruit activity, the first one that kind of struck me was obvious was recruiters reviewing candidate CVs, because in the era of ChatGPT, like, what is the point in that? Previously, in fact, it calls into question what we were actually looking for in the first place, because it wasn't just factual information, because that could have just been bullet points. We were looking for things like formatting. We were looking for things like, presentation of information architecture, maybe even like some glimpses as to how that person would use language as a signal of written communication standard. That, of course, I think is out of the window, because you can simply prompt AI to do this. Now, so where we see AI infiltrating into the candidate behavior, how do recruiters are meant to react to that? Are we simply going to abandon those places where we think, we're never going to see or detect AI assistance? Are we going to actually double down on trying to detect it, and suddenly we become like forensic fraud type people?
Yeah.
What is the direction of recruiter activity in this regard?
So, I mean, again, some people, I don't think the world will go away of, hey, trying to like really clamp down on the use of AI, for example, and putting your resume or your CV together, or even like solving some take-home tasks, for example. I think, again, there may be a reactionary moment where we do that, but that won't obviously be something we worry about in the long run. We will worry about and find solutions for, hey, if my goal during the assessment of this candidate is get to know how they they behave and they think in certain situations, then of course trying to like remove other influences from those interactions is important. So I can imagine that will be one, but I just don't think CV writing is one of those things. So yeah, I think there won't be too much of that reaction. Where I think we'll sort of get to is all the things you described about how we're judging a CV. Is it formatted correctly? Are they sort of using, are they writing sort of clearly and concisely? I'm not saying those things aren't important. They obviously tell you something about the person. So it's not like completely irrational that someone was sort of considering those things, but they weren't literally what the JD was about, right? The JD probably didn't say really good at formatting, written documents and things like this. So it's a good thing that those things go away as ways to judge people. And what it will do is, sort of going back to what we talked about earlier, it will afford the recruiter and increase the expectation, I would say, actually, that the recruiter and the hiring manager have a really thorough and accurate and precise understanding of what they're looking for, so they can have much richer interactions with candidates, whether that's via interviews or whether it's via sort of, interesting ways in the application process to get to unearth those signals, so that you'll get away with this stuff that hasn't really been helping you, which is, hey, I'm just, going to take half the CVs, the ones that, chuck away the first half because I don't like unlucky people. Then I'll look at the rest of them and sort of say, okay, well, this is not formatted well, so I'm not even going to bother reading that one because I haven't got time. Like, you're going to have time now. You're going to be expected to be able to understand, and your job is to find the human being that's best suited for this thing that you're trying to achieve. And so, get rid of some of those shortcuts. So yeah, that's the way I think it will go. I agree that you'll stop caring about those things. There will be a sort of a knock-on impact, which over time we'll realize the best recruiters are the ones who have this greater granularity or higher resolution picture of what they're looking for in a candidate, and they have the ability to identify who has those characteristics.
Yeah, I mean, I can see certainly a separation of activities. It's almost like human beings are like leaving behind a lot of that kind of procedural type work and getting more closer to the areas where it's the implicit knowledge is most important. So implicit knowledge is simply the stuff that perhaps isn't documented, isn't sort of even perhaps not even like fully formed without the discussion, without the conversation. And folks, as recruiters, we all know this. If you're like handling a requirement, for instance, and you were just getting a job spec is emailed over to you, compare that to a conversation you have with a hiring manager where you really get down to it in terms of what this person is looking for. I assure you, all of us have been in that situation, and we're much more confident having had that conversation because we've exchanged the implicit knowledge. So I think recruiters will migrate more fully to that area of work and leave behind a lot of the stuff where we're interacting with, documentation, I guess, or production of documentation. We are running out of time already, Sal. So let me just give a quick shout out for the people who are still watching this. If you have any questions, now is the time to go ahead and ask them. Use the Q&A feature. We're going to get to them in 5 minutes. A couple more questions I've got myself for Sal, which I ask now. There was some really interesting studies as to the very early, I don't know whether you saw it, but there was a collation of studies that I think are going to become canonical in terms of how AI affects human work. And it was basically collecting together the call center case study and the software engineer case study, and I think the paralegal case study. And they discovered some interesting patterns. On the call center and paralegals, they discovered that AI had greatest impact on junior staff members, where it just basically rapidly got them to productivity in a couple of months, where it took them previously 6 to 12 months to get to that level. So everyone's thinking, right, AI is great for the younger person. We're going to hire young people, etc. Of course, the reverse was true with software engineers, where they found actually the junior software engineers weren't particularly confident in using this tooling, didn't seem to have huge productivity gains, whereas the more senior and experienced sort of engineers actually were able to immediately, I get it, and then accelerate their productivity through the roof. So there seems to be like a job specificity in terms of how AI is going to improve your productivity. Now, where do you think recruiters sit in that type of framework? I know we don't want to go bimodal, but do you think it helps junior recruiters more, or do you think it helps senior recruiters more?
Yeah, great question. Answering on the spot, I would, based on how I'm sort of seeing recruiters leverage AI, I would say it actually will, in the short term, help the senior folks more, the more experienced folks more, because a lot of the time those human interactions are the thing that they actually, there's only one way to learn how to really influence and motivate people, and that's really to have like a lot of conversations with people, see a lot of people who are on, weighing up lots of sort of variables when trying to make a important career decision, like which company to join, and you sort of need experience to do that. So the more that those folks can focus on those things, a lot of the time these more senior recruiters, of course, don't do some of the more sort of grindy, drudgerous things anyway, so they can sort of like really just go to town on that. Whereas I think for the more junior recruiters, actually that's a tool set they really have to sharpen. So over time, of course, they may accelerate more quickly to being, really good at these interactions, really good at sort of advising HMs. But in the immediate term, it's not something they can just sort of turn on and all of a sudden they're that talent advisor to the hiring team. So yeah, I think the ramp up maybe is longer for the junior folks, and they will get to that sort of increased productivity quicker than they would previously. But in terms of literally, if you wanted to adopt tools that automate away your busy work tomorrow, the people that will most benefit from that are the senior folks, because they really know what to do at that time, and they know the right questions to ask, they know the right candidates to go and speak to because of this thing and all that sort of stuff, which is essentially an analogy very analogous to a software engineer. The reason a software engineer that's really experienced and really, really talented gets more out of AI is because they know they understand the parts that they need to do and they need to bring to the table that are novel about the thing that they're building, because they've, they haven't had to build it before, but they have had to build all this other stuff before, and they know which parts they can just ask AI to do for them. So I think that seniority is important.
That second slide where you did the U, I think it will look a bit like that. It's either going to be a U or a hill, depending on job. So in other words, a junior, certain job functions, the junior person is going to get most value, and then maybe it's the senior person, and maybe the middle operator, not so much. And then the other side, it'll flip. I think very job dependent though, which is very interesting. And by the way, when we're doing things like job design, which we as people should be doing, we need to be thinking about this. Like, how do you design a job where the implementation of AI will be continually progressing and continually making this person more effective, more productive, more happy, et cetera, rather than designing a job that, oh, actually AI can immediately do it, or AI can't do it, and then it can, and then there's no function for you. So job design is going to be a big component. Whether we do that or someone else in HR, we don't know, or whether we step in on expand scope. Why don't we do and think about that? Okay, we've got to go to the questions. Let's go in turn. Leo Polcher, wouldn't the personalization of AI increase biases since it's reflecting your own bias? I think, probably, right?
I don't think there's a definitive answer. I think one thing is what I mentioned about, if you take if you assume the majority of people are well-intentioned and they go to biases when they have a lack of information and a lack of time, which is usually how people use biases, then AI should afford that. You should create an environment where that's not the case so often. You should have more information and you should have more time to spend on the things that matter. But of course, if your own behavior sort of as it sort of learns from you is littered with bias, it may well adapt to that. But I also think we can put in those guardrails that we talk about, like, hey, you mentioned one of them, Han. Hey, it looks like you spend really long time replying to emails from this person and not so long from this person. Did you know that? So we can assume, again, this person's not doing it on purpose. They have this bias. They're not aware of it. And we can actually use all of this ambient data that these AIs are sucking in to actually hold that up as a mirror to you and say, did you know this was happening? So I'd be actually pretty bullish about that being a sort of an area of opportunity for AI as opposed to an area of concern.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's the devil on your shoulder. It's more like an angel. It's going to be, because there's no reason why it would ever ask you to double down on your biases. Presumably the biases that you're bringing into play over time are not going to be effective for your work. So there doesn't seem to be a motivation to do that.
To take it back to sort of the analogy with hiring people, if you're the type of manager who builds out a team of yes people who say yes to everything you say, and you therefore source and try and train your AI to be similar to that, then maybe you will end up with that way. If you're the type of manager who tries to bring in people who challenge them and whatnot, and you probably have a more high performing team as a result of it, then you're not going to have that outcome. So again, I think the human being is at the center of it. The people who are thinking about adopting AI are the ones who are going to determine how this works for you. It's not going to happen to you. It's going to come out as a result of how you decide to leverage it.
Yeah, and I actually prefer to get closer. Right now, my touch points to AI, the generic side, I'm a little bit more concerned with, but I'm very keen to get. So it's almost like I see it as personal data analytics, similar to health analytics and what have you. Like, we just don't know what's going on in our bodies. We also don't know what's going on in our minds. So maybe AI can help us with that. Why not? Okay, we've got anonymous attendee. I think it's possibly the same anonymous attendee blasting out a salvo of questions. Let's go with this. Do you have any advice for convincing skeptical stakeholders that the time to bring in AI into hiring processes now? Let me just answer this one real quick. Show them the impact. Show them the impact of productivity that you can do when you have some automation, some artificial intelligence in process. I think the cases are now quite convincing. It's just a case of deploying them in the right place, and think about those places where it's obvious to do. Interview scheduling is one. I would say note taking is pretty much obvious now as well.
I'd also say you're probably talking to the wrong stakeholder. Like, every executive that I have spoken to wants to know how their teams are adopting AI to become more productive and more efficient. So there may be some other sort of stakeholder in between you and those execs, but that's not sort of the sense that I'm getting from the market.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Can I try Metaview on a candidate call later today? How do I do that? I don't know. You bothered, Siadhal? Maybe you are.
Just head over to the website, click try for free. You can get started right away.
Yep, get on with it. And okay, final question: what role do you think task-based agents and co-pilots play in the future of recruiting? I think we kind of covered a little bit of this, but maybe you want to just give it a quick overview, Sal. What's your thoughts on this question?
So what roles? The big piece is the undifferentiated human sort of tasks that don't really require a lot of your creativity will go away. So a great way to think about these co-pilots over time will be your cost of delegation is essentially going to go to zero. So if you think about why you don't delegate things right now, one might be, well, I don't have anyone on my team to delegate to, so I have to do it. And I've been campaigning, hey, I want someone on my team so I can delegate some of this stuff to, and I can do this other stuff. Well, guess what? The cost of delegation from a monetary perspective, most AI tools are way cheaper than hiring someone to do some of these things. The other part of delegation that is really expensive is giving another person all of the context that they need in order to do something that I find quite simple, because I've actually honed it over years and years of doing it. Well, that cost is going to go way down too, because these AIs essentially will see what you do, learn from it, and then do it for you without you necessarily even having to ask. So the best, I would say, mental model for these co-pilots is cost of delegation goes to zero. What would I do if delegation was essentially free? Which bits would I delegate? Which bits would I want to keep? Find yourself a co-pilot that will do those things for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, leaving that as the final answer, that's one of the tasks I think is a nice thought experiment. Give yourself like a task audit. What are you doing? What are you spending your time on? Score your degree of interest in doing those activities. And then think, okay, maybe this is how I evolve my role going forward, because perhaps I can deploy some AI in this. By the way, that could be at an individual level. You don't necessarily need to go ahead and, get it done at corporate level. You can use a lot of consumer grade AIs that can actually accelerate you through and actually improve your own productivity as a recruiter. One thing I think is definitely true, folks, is that AI is here. It's no point waiting for us. It's not going to wait for us to get comfortable with it. What you have to do is go ahead and use the technology, get familiar with it yourself. Because this is a moment where I think it's the people that are equipped mentally with AI are definitely going to be a superior and outperform the ones that don't. Sal, really great chatting with you. Let's keep doing this. Folks, if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you register to the next part of this series. We've got 3 more of these to go. Stephanie will be emailing you with the next episode, which is in the planning. But yeah, delighted to have this series back. How AI will save recruitment. That's what we're going to explore. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, folks.